Welcome to the Workforce Wire podcast, brought to you by Employ Prince George's, bridging the gap between job seekers and businesses. And now, here's your host, Walter Simmons.
Welcome to the Workforce Wire podcast. This is your host, Walter Simmons, President and CEO of Employ Prince George's. And today in June, it is National Pride Month, and we are going to celebrate it. We're going to talk about LGBTQ discrimination in the workplace. How do we address it? How do we prevent it? And how do we get rid of it? How do we make change and move forward? Today's special guest is Martin Copeland, Employ Prince George's very own Education, Training, and Assessments Manager. Martin, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Walter. I am so excited to be here. Thank you for having me. I'm really excited to have this conversation.
Awesome, brother. Thank you for coming. This is very important. Not only is June National Pride Month, this is a very important topic that needs to be discussed. I did my research for this episode. I read that in 2019, the USA Today reported that 52% of LGBTQ people living in America lived in states where they could be fired, harassed, or decline promotions due to their sexual orientation. And that's crazy. That means that in 28 states in the country, in 2020, it's legal for somebody to fire a worker for being lesbian, gay, bisexual, or transgender. I think that is crazy. And that's even more reason why we should be having this conversation and really educating people on what's happening to the LGBTQ community. But before we get started, because I know I needed help as I prepare for this episode. I know many others are. Martin, what is LGBTQIA? You taught me the IA. What does that stand for?
Okay, so there is a lot, and I'm going to start with just those letters. Most of us know LGBTQ, lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender. Throughout the conversation, we'll dig a little deeper into what each of those mean and the nuances, particularly when we talk about trans people, the nuances there. But to move into the other letters, LGBTQ, Q is for queer or questioning. For example, I identify as a queer man. Queer is an umbrella term, and it sort of captures a lot of different things. For me personally, I love queer because it keeps people out of my business. You just need to know that I'm not straight, but whatever else you want to know about me is not your business. It's not relevant. So queer just means that people aren't straight. Questioning is for people who aren't quite sure how they identify and they're still open and exploring. I is for intersex. Intersex is a term that describes people who may have been born with both male and female sexual organs or other sexual characteristics. A is for asexual or ally. And it's really important that we include allies in the LGBTQ community. And asexual is for people who may not experience sexual attraction the way other people do. They may not experience it at all. And again, there's a lot of nuance there. There's a few other letters. There's P, which stands for pansexual, demisexual. There's a lot of different things, but just know that the community is rich and diverse and colorful.
Martin, I appreciate that. And I don't want to get too much into your business. Like you said, stay out of it. But I got to ask, why is this discussion important to you?
This is important to me for a lot of reasons. Personally, because I am a queer man and I do have experiences in the workplace and life in general where being queer has been a strike against me. You know, I'm also a Black man. And so, I walk into this world having to try to conform. I am someone who was not, fortunate enough to feel free to be exactly myself and live my authenticity early in life. And we have some courageous and incredible young people in this world who are, 9, 10, 11, 12 years old, being authentic about who they are, true to who they are. And I want to create a workplace that is safer for them. I want them to be able to go and be employed anywhere without experiencing some of the things that myself or older queer people may have experienced.
You said being your authentic self. And I want to tell you right now, as the president and CEO of Employ Prince George's, I'm a very appreciative of you being authentic. We had this episode scheduled because Martin and I had a deep conversation and even really a debate on this topic, and he enlightened me and educated me on why this was important, on what the issues the LGBTQIA community is facing. And I really appreciate you. I appreciate your vulnerability. I appreciate your strength and your courage to bring this up, put yourself on the front line so that we can make a difference. So I want to say thank you for being that person. We need more people like you to educate people like me to move forward. And second, why being your authentic self is more important, we can't leave out the fact that during this time in June, we're dealing with the death of George Floyd. We're dealing with the Black Lives Matters movement. We're dealing with all this racial injustice and inequality in our country. And not only, Martin, as you stated, do you have to walk around and be a Black man, you are having to walk around as a queer Black man, which is like a dual threat. And in 2020, we shouldn't be having that. And it's just ridiculous. So that's even more reason why I appreciate you. And really, I want to salute you for your courage.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Second, as we talk about, this is 2020, and there's so many ridiculous things we're having to deal with. It's reported that 46% of LGBTQ workers in the United States reported that they were closeted in their workplace. Martin, tell me why in 2020 that, and in 2019 that people don't feel comfortable disclosing their sexual orientation in the workplace.
You know, Walter, it's because of the same reason that so many other people don't feel comfortable in the workplace being their full, authentic selves. It's dangerous. Socially, it's dangerous. Professionally, it's dangerous. And whether this is about your race or your expression of your culture, whether this is about the way you speak, or whether it's about your sexuality or gender identity, it is not always safe to be authentic in the workplace. How many times have we said to somebody to tweak something little about themselves so they could get that job, or so that an employer would see them as appropriate and professional? Can you imagine when your gender expression is different? It may not line up with the norm. I can say from myself and my own experiences, once people have found out, in situations when people have found out that I was queer, oh my goodness, it turned into high school in the workplace all over again. Especially as a man who's married to a woman with children, people have so much to say and so many questions, and it can't just be, okay, so he's queer. Can I get that document from you by 2 p.m. today? That's not what happens. The same kind of foolishness that I experienced in middle school and high school, it happens in the workplace. And people stay closeted because if they don't, they won't get those promotions. In some cases, there are some incredible organizations. We have to say this. There's some incredible organizations out here that are open, that do the diversity trainings, but do more than just the diversity trainings. They embrace change and difference and the variety of thought that comes from having a diverse workforce. So, for some people who may not be fortunate enough to work in those spaces, staying in the closet is a must. It's survival.
So, Martin, tell me, you hit on this a little bit. Tell me a little more about the experiences queer people experience in the workplace. Just give me a little more detail.
Sure, and this is broad and nuanced at the same time. Because no demographic is a monolith. Is a monolith. In that, in the queer community, the experiences of trans people in the workplace might be different from the experiences of cisgender queer white men. And just to give a definition, when we say cisgender, we mean people who identify with the gender they were assigned at birth. Versus a trans person is someone who may not identify with the gender they were assigned at birth. And so I recognize, even among the queer community, the privilege that I have. I am a cisgender Black man who isn't too feminine. So because of that, I can walk into workplaces and not experience the kind of venom, frankly, that some of my trans brothers and sisters experience. Imagine being a trans woman. Imagine being a Black trans woman, and you're 6'2", and you walk into this space and you may not, quote unquote, pass. You may not have that physical appearance. There's some incredible Black trans women who are actresses now, like Laverne Cox. When you look at Laverne Cox, she would walk into a room and you wouldn't automatically assume that she was trans, versus some people who may not have the funds to transition in that way. And they walk into a space and they're immediately discriminated against just because someone says something to them like, oh, that's a dude in a dress. That's a dude. Oh, that's a wig. That's a dude. That's a man. Those are the kinds of things that people experience in the workplace. Or the worst part is for people who can, quote unquote, again, pass, who others may not know just by looking what their sexuality is. Being in the workplace and having people make gay jokes, have, really awful conversations about queer people. I'll never forget when, I want to say there was the Oscars a couple years ago. There was an actor, why am I blanking? Billy Porter. Billy Porter went to the Oscars in this absolutely gorgeous tuxedo dress. And the conversation that I heard from coworkers was just incredible. That dude wore that dress and all that kind of stuff. But the worst part was me knowing that one of my coworkers who was sitting really close to me was queer and no one knew it. And they were having this conversation around this person. And that person was so incredibly uncomfortable about it. That's what it's like being a queer person in the workplace.
Wow, Martin, that's deep. That's a good understanding. And I believe that we have to, as you educated and courageously talk to me about discussing this topic, that's powerful. And I think this is the education that workforce professionals need as they prepare managers and supervisors, as they prepare young people, as they prepare adults who need to go into the workplace, who might be LGBTQIA, or they might have to manage a person, right? And understanding that experience allows us to better prepare and address it. So that's powerful. Speaking of the conversation in the workplace and the colleague you were sitting next to, I also read on a website that 59% of non-LGBTQ employees believe it's unprofessional to discuss sexual orientation or gender identity in the workplace. What are your thoughts about that?
That's interesting. Again, because the queer community is not a monolith, people have a variety of opinions on things. My opinion is, I think regardless of your sexuality, it's unprofessional to discuss your sex life at the workplace, in the workplace. I think, what you're doing in the privacy of your home, what your preferences and kinks are, that's your business, but that's personal. It is not professional. It shouldn't come into the workplace. That said, the interesting thing is most people don't bat an eye when heterosexual people bring their sex life into conversations in the workplace. So I think we want to be cautious about how we discuss or how we frame discussions about our personal lives in the workplace and the double standards that may exist. I do think that many people in the LGBT community may not be comfortable discussing it because they know the consequences of discussing their sexuality, their sexual preference in the workplace. It's just like the conversations that I had growing up as a Black kid, where I was told about, to avoid certain expressions of my Blackness in professional settings for fear of upsetting the status quo. We're taught to conform. Being authentic is resistance. It is the most powerful form of resistance. So these people having to discuss their personal lives, being able or comfortable to discuss your personal life in the workplace is a form of resistance.
But, I think it's key. I think you hit on something where you said, if you're straight, it's not appropriate to be discussing your sex life and your relationships in the workplace. And I saw a lot of times what I say to everybody is, you have to treat everything the same. So regardless of you straight, gay, or not, bisexual, what you do for one, you do for all. If it's not appropriate for a straight person to do it. It's not appropriate for you all to discuss it about a bisexual person. It's not a place in the workplace. You need to leave it alone. So I think we need to, treat everything and put everything on an equal platform.
There are certain things about our personal lives that we do discuss in the workplace that we should discuss in the workplace because we're whole people. I just really want employers to know that queer people should be able to have those same conversations without being uncomfortable. For example, I have a picture on my desk of my wife and my children. As a queer man, if I weren't with a woman, I should be able to have a picture of my husband and my children on my desk without people making comments. I should be able to talk to people, my coworkers, about what my husband and I did this weekend. So I want people to really think about what the practical ways that we can allow people to be authentic in the workplace.
I got it. That's a good point. Now, just like you're talking about this, how can LGBTQIA people advocate for themselves in the workplace? How can they speak up if these things aren't happening? What are 3 things they can do?
So that's tough. What are 3 things they can do? Let me not first tell LGBTQ people what to do. Let me speak to employers first, because telling LGBT people what to do is almost like telling Black people, let me show you how not to be a victim of racism. So instead of telling LGBTQ people how to advocate for themselves, I want to challenge employers to really intentionally create inclusive environments and have these environments be inclusive in more than just words. Have uncomfortable dialogue. Even at EPG last year, we had a professional development, and everybody in the organization is required to attend these. That was specifically focused on LGBTQ issues in the workplace. Showing people that we need to have these conversations, especially for us and what we do in workforce, we serve everybody. So yes, everybody in workforce needs to know what trans people are and what their issues are so that we can better serve them when they come into our centers. So pushing those conversations, celebrating Pride Month, having, and it may not be a huge deal, but just like so many workplaces have Christmas celebrations or holiday parties, why not have a Pride party? Why, or at the very least, why not encourage your staff to have, to put up signs? In schools, we used to put up signs that let people know that my office or my classroom was a safe space for everybody, especially for LGBTQ people. So encourage that during Pride Month and all year. And the last thing I would say is consider having someone in your organization be trained to be an LGBTQ liaison or representative, someone who is specifically knowledgeable about these issues so that they can assist when issues arise within the organization and with customers. And I'll say this, to answer your question directly, I think LGBTQ people should do what everybody should do. When they experience something that is not right, speak up. And it's really uncomfortable. It sometimes can be dangerous because we all know women experience horrible things in the workplace and face firing, discrimination, harassment, and all manner of crazy things when they speak up. There's so many marginalized groups that face retribution when they speak up, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't. Queer people need to speak up when things aren't right.
Now, you said when things aren't right. I want to dig a little deeper into that. Let's talk about microaggressions.
Sure.
What microaggressions should people watch out for?
Walter, I'm so glad you asked this question. I genuinely believe that the majority of people in the workplace aren't, how can I say this? They are not the types of people who are going to, they're not Westbrook Church or Westboro Church. They're not the people who are going to stand outside of the workplace with offensive signs and things of that nature. It's the subtle things that we do that make situations and environments uncomfortable for people who are different. So one microaggression, not using actual terms, official terms, when referring to queer people. Using pejorative terms or flat out slurs, though that should never happen, even in casual conversation. We should refer to lesbians as lesbians. And I'm not going to, give an example of any of those inappropriate terms, but we should refer to gay men as gay men or queer men. We shouldn't call transgender people things like tranny. We should call them trans people, a trans woman or a trans man. This is revolutionary. How about just a woman or a man? Avoiding using those inappropriate terms in the workplace is one way to avoid microaggressions. Another is to not make being queer seem abnormal. Some of us ask a lot of questions to people once folks come out, and it's good natured. Educate yourself. Don't rely on that one queer person in your organization to educate you.
Hold on, Martin. I have to say something on that.
Okay.
We are not your Google, Stop, just like we're experiencing now, and with the George Floyd murder, I've talked with a lot of people about this. We are not your Google. Stop asking us how we feel or what do we know. Google it.
Google it.
That's it. I just had to say, Google it, please.
I
tell people all the time. I said it's Googleable. That's Googleable. That question's definitely Googleable. Yep. Mm-hmm. Okay. So, I'm sorry, Martin.
And I'm glad you said that, because here's the difference. If you're a coworker of mine, but we've built a rapport, and you want to ask me, Martin, what are some of your experiences as a queer person? That's one thing. But asking me, Martin, what does LGBTQ stand for? That's Googleable. You can't Google Martin's experiences. You can't Google, Martin, how did you feel when you heard that person make that comment? That's empathetic and wonderful. But you can Google, what are some words that are inappropriate to use when referring to trans people? Those are things that we can Google. No, Walter, I think that's fantastic. There was something else I was going to say. Oh, this is what it was. At EPG, we have a program called KEYS, Knowledge Equals Youth Success. It's a program for disconnected youth. We had a fantastic young person in our program who identified as non-binary. A non-binary person who doesn't identify in terms of gender on that spectrum, on that male-female spectrum. And so this person said to me, Mr. Copeland, do you realize when you speak, when you give examples, all of your examples are on the binary? You talk about boyfriends and girlfriends. You talk about guys and girls. You never say anything about people who might be non-binary or relationships that might not be heterosexual. And that challenged me. Oh man, that challenged me as a queer person. And this student knew I was queer, but that's something that we can do to eliminate microaggressions at work. So
you're saying, and just Mark, just to unpack that, somebody who identifies as queer could have been seen as having some discriminatory practices in your lesson plan.
Exactly. And so the way we get rid of that is by listening to the queer people who speak up and say, hey, why don't you consider this? And the great thing was that, and I'm grateful to the Cold Keys team, we created an environment where that person felt comfortable sharing that information with me.
Yeah, I think that's what's key, is that the ability to speak up to change, and Keys Knowledge Equals Youth Success is Employ Prince George's out of school youth program. You can get more information at employpg.org. That's a plug there. Sorry, guys. But I think that's key when I mentioned earlier that you can be ignorant to the fact of something or not realize it and be discriminating and not even realize it. So that's why we have to do our research and learn. But it's also key to understand that as workforce professionals, we have to address these practices in our career readiness trainings. That's something we're going to talk about. But Martin, I want to go on to what's the most, what part of the LGBTQ population is most vulnerable to discrimination?
For me, without question, that would have to be trans people and non-binary people. And that could be any person who may not express their gender identity in quote unquote traditional ways as clearly male or clearly female. Trans people are disproportionately discriminated against in the United States and across the world. Black trans women are being murdered in our streets constantly. And I should say Black and brown trans women are being murdered in our streets constantly. So if, you know, Black and brown trans women are being murdered just for existing, do you think that they're being hired without question? It's not happening. This is a community that needs the workforce community to actively reach out. And to give you some practical tips, workforce organizations and employers need to not wait to make the first step. Right here in the DMV, we have incredible organizations like Smile and Casa Ruby, and every workforce organization in this area should be partnered with those organizations to offer free training, to have direct pathways to opportunities. Like, those organizations should not have to fight hard to find training and opportunities for the people they serve. Casa Ruby, for example, serves homeless LGBTQ youth and adults, for that matter, and there should be a direct pathway to their students from workforce organizations. So you know, that those are really vulnerable populations, and we have to take the initiative to go find them and serve them.
Martin, that's powerful. I also want to discuss, let's move into a workforce development. Last few minutes we have here. How can workforce programs best prepare LGBTQ populations for the workforce?
There's a couple things. First, workforce organizations have to educate themselves. You can't serve a population that you don't know. You could ask almost any workforce professional at EPG or other workforce orgs across the country, and we can tell you so many incredible things about veterans. Deep understanding of veterans' needs, people with disability, older workers, youth. But ask those same people about the needs, the specific needs and challenges of the LGBTQ community, and most of them will not have an answer. So we need to educate ourselves. The second thing I would suggest is partner with LGBTQ workforce organizations. Yes, they exist. Yes, they are strong. And yes, they do great work. One in particular I'm going to plug is called Trans Tech Social. And for anybody who's listening who watches the show Pose or American Horror Story 1984, there's an actress who is in Pose, she played Candy, but she is also the founder and CEO of Trans Tech Social. And they offer services to LGBTQ people with a focus on trans people and non-binary people. And they do workforce development. So they do virtual seminars every week where people can learn interviewing skills, resume writing, all kinds of things. Organizations like this, we can plug our people into remotely. That's the first thing that comes off my head. Angelica Ross is the CEO's name. But I definitely wanted to share that there are organizations like that we can partner with.
Okay. Any other resources jumping out to you for people to learn more or to get help?
Yeah, I would say work with your local LGBT organization. So it may be GLAAD, it may be, various chapters of national organizations in your area. Most of them already have active workforce development teams, or at least a professional on their staff that can connect you to not only the people, but educate you about the challenges. And I would also encourage organizations to start having trainings internally that go really deep, do a deep dive into the issues faced by the LGBTQ community.
Martin, that's very deep, brother. This is good information. As we close it out, any last words for how employers and businesses can create environments that accept the LGBT community and limit the amount of discrimination, microaggressions, and negative interactions?
Absolutely. The only way organizations can make all this change is when individuals face their own bias. So every CEO, every CFO, and every employee from there all the way to the brand new person who was just hired has to face their own personal biases regarding LGBTQ people. What do we think? What are our visceral reactions? How do I feel when I see Billy Porter in a dress at the Oscars? We have to face those things and then understand and accept that some of those perceptions are wrong, that they're not appropriate, and that they hinder us from allowing LGBT people to live authentically in the workplace. So we have to challenge those things, and then we have to have some conversations with people who don't look like us, believe like us, or behave like us, so that they can inform us of what the changes are that need to happen. You know, as passionate as I am about this, I am in no way an expert. You know, there are people who are working in this space and have been, organizations who have been in this space for 30, 40 years. Those are the people we need to talk to. We need Casa Ruby, we need Smile, we need them to come to our organization and tell us, this is what you need to do to make this space more conducive and more inclusive for LGBTQ people. That's what needs to happen.
Martin, that's powerful. This message, your courage, your authenticity is remarkable. I appreciate it, and it's a pleasure to have you on the Employ Prince George's team. Yes, people, Martin Copeland is at Employ Prince George's. He is not going anywhere. But I just want to thank you. To get more information about the services we're offering at Employ Prince George's, we are going to have some events coming up. Visit us at www.employpg.org. Happy Pride Month. Let's celebrate it. And again, we have to engage, we have to educate, and we have to empower our job seekers, our coworkers. And I'm going to say to all my workforce development board directors, my nonprofit leaders, our president and CEOs, executive directors, change starts with you. It starts at the top. We got to make a difference, and we have to be the people. I encourage you to go to NOB. I encourage you to go to NADUP. I encourage you to go to NASWA, all these national entities, and advocate for trainings and workforce development competencies that discuss, prepare, educate people to prepare job seekers and employers and businesses across the country to prevent LGBTQ discrimination, to create safe workplaces, and to really make a difference. It starts with us. Workforce development professionals, you are the heart of America, and it starts with us. We train the next generation, and we educate businesses on how they can become more productive, and that is ensuring that we prevent discrimination. That's it for the Workforce Wire podcast. This has been Walter Simmons, your host, President and CEO of Employ Prince George's. Thank you, Martin Copeland. Everybody, let's move forward, let's be compassionate, and let's make a difference. Thank you.